Late last week, Elon Musk announces he's going to move the X headquarters from San Francisco to Texas. He said he's tired of dealing with the violent drug addicts just to get in the building. And yet, our guest today, he's excited. He's long San Francisco office. He's going to share why and much more today, right here on the Commercial Real Estate Report. The mission of our show is to empower you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development with Abernathy Holdings. We go out and we build Class A self-storage in California, Arizona, and soon to be beyond. Guest today, been involved in San Francisco office since the early 2000s. He right now has got access to $500 million to $1 billion to invest in San Francisco office. He's excited about the future of San Francisco. He is the founder of Brick and Timber Collective, Glenn Gilmore. Glenn, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate being here. Thanks for having me on.
I just mentioned about, Elon Musk moving from San Francisco. We see the media reports of the, homelessness, needles, feces, and yet you're excited about the future of San Francisco. Why?
Well, I think, as it is with all real estate markets, there's sort of micro districts within a city that are tougher than others. I think the mid-market area where X's headquarters has been was sort of a project and an idea before the pandemic of how to revitalize a really tough, struggling part of the city. And Twitter back then was offered incentives by the city to move there, tax incentives, which they were later criticized for taking. And there was a bit of momentum that sort of fizzled in the mid-market area. Mid-market, if you know San Francisco, is sort of away from the water, down Market Street on the way to the Castro. It sits adjacent to the Tenderloin. It sits adjacent to the Civic Center. And this is kind of ground zero for where the city has struggled the most and probably will be the last area, if ever, to be cleaned up. So, I think that Elon's decision likely has and I wouldn't criticize it, has a lot of factors going for it, including, we still have our Prop C tax here in San Francisco, which is really hard on fintech companies. It's driven them out of the city. It's a 3% revenue tax that was enacted, I believe, in 2019, right before the pandemic. It was supposed to be the tax that once and for all put an end to homelessness and gave the city the necessary funds to house all of our homeless. And since that tax has been enacted, I think we all know that the problem got massively worse. And so, but it also makes it very difficult if you're a fintech business to be in San Francisco. It makes it economically unfeasible. And I think that what we can kind of conclude with X is that he's likely to add a fintech aspect and element to that business. So there are a myriad of reasons why it doesn't make sense for him to be in San Francisco. He's also got Boca Chica and all the work he's doing down in Texas. So I imagine, trying to be CEO of all those different companies might be a little bit easier if they were a little closer together. So, I understand his move seems like a big blow to San Francisco, and it is, and it isn't. I also think he's making a very interesting political statement that will help those of us left behind about the importance of working with businesses and the entire ecosystem of the city instead of taxing some of these businesses away. And especially when I don't think at the end of the day, the tax actually yields. It certainly didn't yield the result, likely doesn't even yield additional income in the long run.
Same thing's happening in ULA with the transfer tax in here. But you just mentioned, hey, Chris, we think it's actually going to create a positive wake for us, for the people that stick around. I want you to tell us more about that thesis, but also with this context. And you and I had this conversation yesterday. This is a tweet from Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. And I think this shocks a lot of people because he was a big proponent of the Prop C, the tax you just mentioned a moment ago. He's now starting to say, hey, and he was having a spat with Elon Musk on Twitter about it, going, hey, maybe we do need to make some changes. What's even more surprising, I think, to some people is he's now saying we need to refund San Francisco police, not defund. So with that context, dive deeper into what you just mentioned about, hey, this could actually be a positive wake for the people that stick around.
100%. And I think this is a great tweet. If you scroll down on this and you see Elon's response to Mark's refund the police comment, he then immediately brings up Prop C. And Mark Benioff, acknowledges that this is a tax that needs to be rolled back. So I think that first of all, it's great that we have this platform on X where we get to see people in real time hammering and hashing out the issues. It's what a time to be alive. What a great use of technology, I think, to have some very powerful business leaders in this country, have the conversation right in front of all of us so we can see what's happening. So I think that Elon's move, I think that Mark also last week announced that, Salesforce is the largest private employer in San Francisco. He announced that they're going to be back 4 to 5 days a week in their office. If you remember when the pandemic hit, Mark was maybe one of the very, very first tech leaders to come out and say that you could work from anywhere. And so that's a big reversal for just the sentiment. I think that work from home is a very tough entitlement to take away from people who've been used to it. And I think we all know that. And I don't know that it needs to be taken away from everybody. I think that as they say, hybrid is the future. Well, I think it just also means that the return to any kind of normal or 4 to 5 day work week is going to be quite a challenge and an uphill challenge and take time. But I don't think that there's a whole lot of debate over the results of how the institutions are doing with work from home. So in the long game, the proof will be in the pudding. Do companies that work remotely, are they more profitable than companies that are not remote? That's the whole question in business of why you do things. But it sometimes takes a while to sort it. So there's a lot in between, and I think a lot of it right now is yes, but there's pressure. What if our employees quit? What if we can't recruit and attract employees? What if, and that is all very, very good. And by the way, I can now recruit overseas and get people for 1/3 the cost, and so and my office expense is expensive. So all of those are good business, sound business reasoning, but at the end of the day, we haven't seen a really great demonstration of people being able to stitch together a multinational, fully remote company and grow it into, the next unicorn. So, and I don't really believe in people's heart of hearts they think that that's possible, but somebody will do it. But
I was going to say, and I'm going to get into your investment thesis in a moment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some reports here first, but I think there are some reports out there where people are suggesting, hey, with AI, which we'll get into more here in a second, you're going to see the first solopreneur or 3-person company that's going to, be $1 billion company, right? So there's some conversations going around there, which again, may or may not hinder your thesis in regards to office space. Before we go there, just real quickly, because the big conversation, as I'm sure you see, again, speaking of X and conversations in regards to real estate, everyone has at least the conversation about running from San Francisco because of the media reports I mentioned the homelessness, the drugs, the feces, allegedly. How bad is it? Or maybe it's not that bad.
Well, I think they already ran, Chris. I mean, I would say that, that those that were on the fence have run. But I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing quite a few people come back. And the reason is the excitement around AI. The reason is the excitement about wealth creation and being able to start companies and the meritocracy that San Francisco technology community has sort of always been, has always been sort of attractive about being in that business. So, but ultimately what we're seeing right now is, we're at 37% vacancy in the city. We are seeing activity tick up in leasing a little bit, but we're also still in a very high interest rate environment before a national election and local elections. The next year is going to be a really determinant year if we're moving the right way or not. And so that's what we're sort of predicting. But if we're trying to forecast the office values of where they are today historically, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck there on the basis side. So, the discount to replacement is one of the highest ever. So I think that there's certain, just like in all real estate, not every asset's going to perform anything like the one next door or a block away or 2 blocks away. So it's very important that you're judicious in which assets will come back quicker, which are more valuable, and understanding locally kind of what it is that our customers want.
Thus where your expertise comes in. And again, we'll get into that thesis in a moment, but you did mention the November elections. I think one of the things I want to just dive into a little bit is that as some of these assets become mark to market, we know they're going to be much lower than what they were previously valued, thus reducing, tax revenue within the city of San Francisco. It's already got its challenges with a $15 billion budget for a city, which is just, I think in 2010 it was $6 billion. Now it's 15. But with those decline in revenues, what's the city going to do? Or is there going to be enough changes in November to potentially salvage that?
Oh, I think the city's got is got a huge dilemma, as a lot of municipalities have around the country, as our federal government has. I think that we're going to have to get real about rolling some things back on the cost side. There's no way that we can bridge that gap fast enough. It's going to be a massive hole. And the tax policies, I think that have been enacted are already, San Francisco's already very severely taxed. So it's not going to help anyone raising taxes, because it's just going to turn around and make the recovery slower. So I think that necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And we are going to hit a wall here, and something was going to need to be done. But I can tell you that on the positive side, I mean, that's the doom loop. I think that's priced in.
Wow.
But I'll tell you that on the positive side, if you follow our local elections, you'll see a completely different set of issues and priorities than we saw 3 or 4 years ago. So a complete 180 on what the city needs and what the priorities are for the city going forward. And front and center is safety, number one. They'll wear you out on the safety issue if you listen to a debate on how often they talk about it, because everything's corners around safety. And then as we go through there, it starts into how to revitalize downtown, how to revitalize the city, and what the city should look like 10, 20 years from now. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk of trying to figure out more relaxed zoning, more relaxed approvals. And we're going to see, in a place that's been, arguably the hardest place to develop in the country, we're going to see that get, I believe, easier, not harder. And so I think we're going to see that could create quite a boom. Remember also, we're 100 million feet of office space in the city, and we're constricted on all sides. It's not a very big market. So for the size and the per capita of valuable companies that are here, I think it's going to take some time, but I think it's a pretty good bet right now.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing you say is, hey, Chris, I think you're going to see some newly elected people that are actually going to have open arms, and rather than be, prohibitive or constrictive to business and developers, actually embrace and help facilitate it. Is that a fair assessment on what you're saying, or?
Your lips to God's ears. I believe that's the case. I believe that's the sentiment and the will of the voters right now, for the most part. Is that there's a group of people, and there's also this has been a really interesting election cycle in that we have, if you kind of go back historically in San Francisco, the group that tried to sort of stick up for business, and so to speak, which have been shouted down, has always been real estate owners, and they've been demonized for doing such, because the other side of the argument, we kind of understand where they're coming from on trying to create more taxes and say, developers are greedy, all these things. So there's been a lot of pushback, and there's been a lot of reticence for a time on behalf of real estate folks to get that involved, because you can do it at your own peril. But now we've seen, and I think that in large part, and probably because they were newer companies, like the technology community sort of stayed out of politics. And I think that overwhelmingly the people in that community realize that may have been a mistake. And I think in this cycle, you see them really leaning in and voicing. So I think it's great for the city in the long term. I hope they stay involved, because, everybody in business is a problem solver in one way or another. And those minds and those that ability needs to be translated to our governments as well. We can't just sit on the sideline.
Boy, if San Francisco can turn 180 degrees, like you just suggested, anything is possible. I think that would be a huge eye-opening experience for really the rest of the nation as well. I believe I'm from the Midwest, and everyone says, hey, whatever starts in California just reverberates throughout the rest of the country. So whatever California starts goes.
Well, wouldn't it be great if it was like a real positive thing this time?
That's what I mean. It would be fantastic. And with that being said, I'm curious, because you and I talked about this briefly yesterday, but I'm sure you've seen the numbers on the ULA transfer tax down here was just been abysmal. They suggested it was going to generate X amount of revenue. It's been not even close. You said yesterday there's a document within the mayor's office suggesting that, I think it was Prop C or one of these transfer taxes, is not even close to generating the revenue that it stated. Do you think people in elected positions are starting to realize, hey, the more I tax something, less of it I actually get, and maybe they're starting to change their mindset around these policies?
Yeah, I think I think it's going to take some new blood to do that, because a lot of people don't want to, in politics, it seems like a game where you can never admit that you ever made a mistake ever. And so it's going to be very difficult to get people that, and that's the difference between like a Benioff tweet, sort of admitting that he didn't say he was wrong, but I mean, by admitting that policy needs to be reversed, he's admitting that he was wrong. But he can do that because he's a business leader, and he knows that you don't just double down on your mistakes. Politicians tend to do that over and over again. So I think new blood is the only way you're going to get people to look more critically at policy, and see ways to do things a little bit more beneficial to everybody.
I want to get into your thesis and why you're excited about investing in San Francisco office. Again, last time we talked, you said I've got, hey, Chris, $500 million to $1 billion access to capital. Matt Moran's a friend of mine that played football at Stanford, did a $6 billion deal with Sam Zell back in the day. He was on the podcast, Glenn. He said, Chris, if I was young again, I would be going out and hustling to raise money and get into San Francisco. I want to play for you a quick clip, because I know you were on his podcast recently as well. But Spencer Levy, head of global strategy at CBRE, he was at a self-storage event, Glenn, and I want to share with you quickly what he had to say as well.
Yeah.
With talent is right where we're sitting right now. San Francisco is not just San Francisco. It's the whole Bay Area, which was where we are in, which is why, even though you see nothing but negative headlines about San Francisco right now, if I could buy best office in the best submarkets at fair market value, I would be backing up the truck. Now,
I love that comment. So what's your thesis? Why are you excited?
I mean, I think it's a simple one, and I think he's right. And I've been thinking this and beating the drum for the last couple of years that this was coming. I mean, this is one of those things that real estate people, when the markets are good, always talk about. We should keep our powder dry, and we should wait till interest rates rise, and this is going to collapse people. And we literally describe the scenario we're in now, and then you get folks that are on the other side who say, yeah, but I'm not sure, or I don't know. Well, I mean, there has to be a long view. There has to be a long view in order to actually commit the capital to making the investment. But I think as far as safety of that investment and to risk to return, it's kind of hard to see how, if you could step back a second, how this isn't a once in a generational event. So I think both those guys are right, but I'm on that side. So there are people that are not. The counter argument is that the world's changed forever since COVID, and that remote work is here to stay, and offices are a buggy whip or a thing of the past. But I don't think we're seeing that true globally. I don't think we're seeing that in other markets. I think it's purely a social issue right now, and I think it's changing.
How much is AI working into your thesis? And I ask because one of the things that Spencer talked about is, look, we're not really in the real estate business. It's more about demography and talent. He says, look, the best talent in the world is right there in San Francisco. When it comes to AI, we are pretty clear that's going to be the future. So how much is that working into your thesis?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, AI to me is a lot. Is kind of going back. It's a lot like the dot-com boom of 2000, where we're going to spray and pray and have a bunch of companies and most won't make it. But what we know about AI is that it's going to be a ubiquitous technology that that's going to affect everything and every kind of service that we do. And anytime a technology revolution like that sort of gets launched, it winds up being a very powerful driver for real estate. Now, the opposite, the other end of that is that, well, AI is going to eliminate jobs. AI is going to eliminate jobs. And I think that's going to be true. But generally, new technologies that eliminate jobs have always created, more jobs where we didn't expect. So I think you have to use history as your guide there. But I'll tell you that debate is very, very, very much hot and alive and out there. I would say that in the venture community, probably 50% of the people are bullish on jobs and 50% are not. So it really cuts right down the middle. And I think that both sides have a great argument.
Have you deployed any of the $500 million or $1 billion yet? And if so, where? And if not, why not?
We have not, and we have been involved in a couple of assets that we were interested in. And unfortunately, in both, we didn't bid quite high enough, but we're getting close. So,
well, I think that might surprise. So you were outbid for a San Francisco office.
Oh, I think it might surprise people at how competitive it is to buy these at these rates. One thing that will blow your mind is how many bids they get for an office building at this rate. It's not as though they get 1 or 2 or 5 or 10. They're getting 20 to 40 bids a building. So it's all private not all, 70% private capital, and it's competitive because there is a lot of conviction around private capital in this area. Not yet so much on the institutions, but I think they're starting to take notice. I mean, the price discovery's in, but how do you differentiate yourself when 20 people bid the exact same number, and 20 people have the exact same underwriting and the exact same plan? And you might say, well, differentiate your plan or do this or that. You can, but the minute you start differentiating too much from sort of the common accepted underwriting parameters, that's when then you get told back from your capital partners that you're missing, it should be this way. So it's kind of looked at a little bit. You're going to have to stretch if you're going to get a deal, and I think that there's going to be plenty of opportunities over the next 18 months here as a lot of these reset. But we need to be more involved because the music will stop, and then all of a sudden these deals that you were getting for $250 or $300 a foot, if the interest rates come down, they're at $450 a foot, even if there's no more leasing. So now it starts to sort of slide away from you. So time is now. It's competitive.
I was going to ask you about kind of the buyer seller spread, especially with the anticipation of rates going down. Are you starting to see more people in San Francisco go, maybe we're going to take this off of the market, or we're not as quick to try to get it off our hands?
I don't think 100%. I think it's really hard right now to get to a buyer seller deal with an actual owner. I think the stuff that's trading and the majority of the stuff that will trade are going to be with lenders who need to clear it off their books.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, San Francisco office was trading at $1,000 a foot in the heyday, and now you're talking deals around $100 to $300 a foot.
Yeah, 100 is a misnomer. I think that you're looking right now. I think for a quality asset that would have traded at $1,000 a foot back then, you're probably looking at $300 a foot right now. That's probably about right. An asset that might trade at 200 or 220 today probably was not $1,000 asset, right? It's probably a $750 asset or something. So I think but the majority of the sort of financial district quality buildings have had 2 and 3 and 4 rounds of different ownerships just pumping capital into them. So there's just been so much money put into these buildings that it does. That's why they were trading for $1,000 a foot. I mean, when they were $1,000 a foot, if you would try to develop one with carry costs and everything else, you were probably looking at $1,200 to $1,400 a foot. You were probably at the $1,000 still at a discount to new development. And I think new development in office is something we can count on not happening for the foreseeable future.
Yes. Talk a little bit about, if I remember correctly, you currently have a really nice office portfolio in San Francisco, and fully leased, correct?
Yeah, with the exception of, so in Spencer's, when I recorded Spencer's building, we had one building that we were expecting, but a couple weeks later we lost a full building tenant. So we do have a building right now that was June 1, I think, when we took that building back, and we're 60% leased since June 1. So we've done a number of deals in that building already, and I think we'll be likely fully leased there by the end of the year. So we've been and the rest of our portfolio is full. But we also have a very boutique portfolio. I don't want to act like we did some super special thing. We do not have large scale office towers, which is a different, we have smaller boutique, historic type of office product that's super luxury. And so that part really held up nicely. And part of that was just the way we built our company and our capital, and what was interesting to us at that time when the prices were so high. We felt safer in boutique luxury assets.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up, because Barry Sternlich's talked a lot about, hey, Class A is really actually still doing pretty well within the United States. And then you look over at Europe, and he's like, the Europe vacancy rates are super low. So I don't know if you want to talk about what you're seeing there, and if you think that trend starts to change in the United States, or if the U.S. is just going to continue with this work at home.
No, I think it's going to change. I think that. So I gave you a story about a company that I won't name that was a tenant of ours. They had an office in San Francisco, and they had an office in Paris, and the pandemic hit, and they jettisoned their office here in San Francisco, and then when the pandemic ended, they didn't return to their office in San Francisco, but they were fully in the office in Paris, which same company, fully remote in one country and their US business collapsed, and their business in Europe was holding them together. Now, it turned out that their CEO during the pandemic had jettisoned San Francisco and, was living remotely himself. I don't know if that entered into his equation of his policy, but I think we've seen a lot of that across the board. And we've seen a lot of destruction in good companies that sort of lost their way because everybody was disjointed. And it's interesting. And that I bring up that one because the other, on the other side of the pond, they were holding it together, so the proof is kind of there, same business. So I think, again, I don't like to go into it too much because it does anger people quite a bit who have the benefit of being able to work remotely. And I understand that. I also think that in fairness to sort of like the spirit of work and culture, like the 9-to-5 work week doesn't have to be sacrosanct. We now take work home on weekends more than we ever did. We work late into the evenings, early in the morning. People are working at all kinds of hours. The internet allows us to do this. So some flexibility in the work week, depending on the role, depending on the company, I think is warranted. It shouldn't be an extreme one way or the other. But people who figure that out are going to have the most productive companies, and it's for them to figure out.
Very well said. I mean, I'm a sports guy. You can't beat being in the locker room with the guys, right? You can't beat that X factor dynamic that takes place. So 2 more things.
Imagine in sports, imagine everybody on a baseball team just practiced with a trainer and never practiced together. And they say, well, we don't understand. We can practice in my backyard. It's fine. We'll be at the game. Which team's going to win?
100% agree with you.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time because it's been a very dynamic conversation. So 2 more things is, one, take us inside the room, the building that you're trying to fill up right now. What are the conversations with potential tenants? Is there a lot of TIs? What are they saying to you?
Well, we're kind of fortunate in that the building has been pretty fitted out, so it's almost turnkey, ready to go. So, but generally, there's some small things that we do to help. If a tenant needs something in there, some specific thing, we can quickly adapt and build it for them. We're doing less of here's money, you do it, and more of we'll just take care of it for you. We have a construction team internally, and we can hammer stuff out a lot quicker and more efficiently because we want to get them up and going. The people that are leasing want to get up and going pretty fast. They're not very patient, and they don't need to be.
When you look at your thesis and you think, San Francisco long term, from a SWOT analysis standpoint, what's the weakness in your thesis?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think the weakness of the thesis would be if we see a long, prolonged run of these higher interest rates. I think a prolonged run of higher interest rates is going to make recovery really, really hard. And I think that there's probably a lot of people who think that's what's going to happen. So that would be the weakness. I think we need to see some relief in the interest rates, or it's going to be hard to see a lot of value creation in the near term.
Which is interesting where, and again, not to go political, and my thesis, if Donald Trump wins, I don't know if people remember this, but there was a time when President Trump was president, he was calling on Powell for negative interest rates. So I think if he becomes president, you may see those rates go down, especially as a real estate guy, go down pretty.
Well, he doesn't mention on the trail at all interest rates, hardly, and I happen to think it's because, but I think that, incentives matter, and I'd be hard pressed to see him not make a hard push there if he were the winner. So I do think that the national election could have massive implications across what we do.
Two quick notes on that, and then we'll give you the last word. But one, the only thing I've heard him say out loud is he's been pressuring Powell a little bit to not lower rates in September because he knows the impact, right? What that could do for an election. And then secondly, I don't know if you've seen the stories, but he's talking about taking away or usurping some of the power from the Federal Reserve chair and making it more within the White House. So it kind of, shares with you where he wants things to go. So again, thank you for this. It's been a great conversation. I'd love to have you back. And I just want to give you the last word. If there's anything else that you want to share or add that I haven't asked you. And of course, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Sure. You can reach out to me at Glenn, Glenn at bricktimber.com. Happy to have conversations about San Francisco real estate with anyone. Happy to tour folks around and do a show and tell if they're in town as well. I think my last word is that, we're all, as I said on the Spencer Levy's show, people in organizations sound a lot smarter when they're negative. It takes a little more courage to be positive in light of these things. I know that there are people that probably think that, a fool and their money kind of are bound to part, but you do have to eventually be positive, and you have to be part of the positive change and bring cool experiences to life for people if you're going to make a difference in this business. So I would say, find your spot, find your niche, and be a Wolverine.
Oh, I love that. Get out there and be a Wolverine, be a warrior in this industry, make an impact. And again, Glenn Gilmore, you can see his site here, brickandtimbercollective.com. Go check him out, doing some exciting things in San Francisco. And he said, hey, there could be a 180-degree shift in that city, which would be a major, major impact across that area in the state and potentially the entire country. So Glenn, keep up the great work. And thank you again for the time and the insight.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it, Chris.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.